Hello, and welcome to the Your DNA Guide Ask the Expert series, where we are interviewing an expert from the genetic genealogy industry every week in the month of October. Today, we were supposed to have Gal, and I'm probably going to say her last name wrong, but Gal, I think it's Zirin. She is a senior product manager from MyHeritage, and we were going to ask her all kinds of questions about the present, past, and future of MyHeritage. But Gal and the other members of the MyHeritage team are really involved now in the conflict in Israel, and we are sending them our best prayers and wishes, hoping that they remain safe. In the meantime, I've invited, and he's agreed, thank you, my very good friend Blaine Bettinger to join us today. We will be talking a little bit about MyHeritage to make sure we're filling on that promise that many of you showed up to hear about MyHeritage. But then we'll just be exploring some other current genetic genealogy topics and some of Blaine's personal expertise, especially in AI and other kinds of interesting topics that are really relevant right now. So welcome, Blaine.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So I thought we would start by asking, what is the history of Blaine Bettinger in 3 minutes or less?
All right. So I grew up in upstate New York, rural country, went to grad school, then I went to law school. In the meantime, I became a genealogist. I've been doing genealogy now for about 30 plus years. And it is something that is defined who I am. It is near and dear to my heart. I am celebrating my 20th year in genetic genealogy as well, having taken a test almost exactly 20 years ago and receiving my results in October 2003 from that very first test. And from there, it was all uphill or downhill or both. And in 2007, I started thegeneticgenealogist.com, my blog, because there weren't any educational resources really. There was a great book by Ann Turner and Megan Smoleniak that was really it. And so I kind of wanted to start the blog to not only educate others, but educate myself. And then I started speaking a couple of years later, and I was so terrified of public speaking in college and so on. But I got over my fear, and now I love it. And so I have spent the last decade plus traveling the country and the world, talking about genetic genealogy and hopefully getting people to test, hopefully helping people break through brick walls, and has led me to today speaking with all of you. So here I am.
Excellent. I had no idea that you had a fear of public speaking. That is
Huge.
that is really a huge thing to overcome. You must
Yeah,
be kind of into this stuff.
a little bit.
Okay. All right. So let's start with sharing your top 3 favorite features at MyHeritage. What is it? I mean, all of our testing companies offer us something different, right? And we like them for lots of different reasons. What are like 3 reasons maybe that you would go to MyHeritage for something?
So I'm a huge shared matching person. I am obsessed with shared matching. I think it is the most powerful tool that we have in our arsenal. And one thing I like about MyHeritage is that they put the icing on the cake, because they do show us shared matching, but they tell us whether or not that cluster of shared matches triangulate as well. So the shared matching plus triangulation feature is, I think, a nice little addition that you don't get in many places. 23andMe is the only other place, and it's actually more complicated than MyHeritage. So I absolutely love that feature, shared matching plus triangulation. Related to that, they were among the first to really take in and utilize the auto clustering. So this is the tool from E.J. Bloom, developed and licensed by MyHeritage, that looks at your matches, creates clusters, and sends you a report that you can work with. Again, shared matching, it is so incredibly powerful. And auto clustering is just a new way to look at shared matching. It's really quick and easy. I think it's intuitive. So I just love that feature as well. The third thing isn't necessarily a tool of MyHeritage. It's actually the European focus of the database. It has one of the strongest components of European test takers, and that makes it unique and very valuable. So if you have European ancestry, if you are in Europe, MyHeritage is really an important database that you have to be in to maximize your ability to find DNA matches. So those, I think, were three of the things that off the top of my head that I can really think of that make MyHeritage a really great place to test.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Like, I feel like we wish that our DNA testing companies would tell us we have 3,720 people from Austria, right? But they don't break it down like that. But I think as an industry, and certainly as people who kind of see lots of other people's results, like you and I do, I
Yep.
think it is fairly consistent, at least in my experience. It sounds like in yours as well, that people find European matches more often in MyHeritage than they do perhaps in any other company. Would you say that's kind of what you were saying?
Without question, that is very much the experience I've encountered and that I've heard from other people. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. And that's and just kind of FYI for those of you who don't know, like there's two ways for you to get into MyHeritage, right? You can physically test with them or you can transfer. Now, last week they had a special where you could transfer your DNA and have access to all the tools for free. I got an email this morning that they have extended that offer. So if you haven't yet transferred your DNA or the DNA of many other kits that you might manage, once you get permission from someone else, that kit that you manage, you can actually transfer it into MyHeritage for free and then have access to the tools for free if you do that this week. So it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah,
Like to
for
take
sure.
advantage of these things, definitely. Okay, I wanted to share a comment in here that, of course, I've just lost. Oh, here it is. From Christine. So this is just such an exciting success story, and I think represents what we were just saying. So she says, I've uploaded my DNA to MyHeritage and found my great grandfather's siblings' descendants. A 20 plus year mystery finally realized the sibling went to Brazil. So I think that is exactly what we were saying. Again, you just kind of find matches there that are outside the US that maybe you wouldn't have found in other places. So thanks for sharing that, Christine. Okay, let's talk about the CM Explainer tool at MyHeritage and how the tool has been engineered to include the age of both testers. So tell us how you feel about that decision to include that like right out of the gate in that tool and make it just a part of how they're trying to get us to use this tool and what you think about that decision.
Sure. I think it has pros and cons, like you say. And one thing I'll emphasize from the start is there's no tool that tells us what the exact relationship is. So it doesn't matter what we do here. We're never going to, I won't say never, we currently don't have a tool that tells us exactly what the relationship is. The goal of every one of these relationship tools is to point to the most likely relationships. And having the age factored in can be beneficial, right? Someone can't be the grandparent of someone else if their age difference is 10 years. And there are relationships that can be eliminated completely, and there are relationships that are unlikely on the basis of age. Now, that's where perhaps the con comes in, because when we say unlikely, right, we're not eliminating those. So we all have worked with family trees where there is a first cousin that's 25 years different from their first cousin, or an aunt that's younger than the niece, right? And so we want to be careful about eliminating possibilities on the basis of age, but using them as a probability, I think, is a pro. We just got to be careful about saying how we can't have an aunt that's younger than a nephew. Well, of course we can, right? And that, especially in I think more so in previous generations when families were bigger, right? And when the age gap between child number 1 and child number 13 was, 20 years, that's much more likely to have all of these huge age gaps. I think in modern society, that's a little less likely, not impossible, but we just want to be careful about eliminating possibilities on the basis of age. That's all.
Excellent. I love that. So I love that you said don't eliminate based on age, and always remember these are always probabilities. That's the thing, right? They're just saying they're giving you a whole range of probabilities, of possibilities, and you never want to say never,
Yep.
especially when it's, even if it's 1% possible, that means it's possible,
Yep.
right? And I think one of the biggest things people can go into the tool with is understanding their own family, right? Like you
Yep.
said, if you know that your family has 13 kids who had 13 kids, then you're going to see some of these larger age gaps than if you don't. So knowing yourself, I think, is really important too.
Yep,
We
for
actually
sure.
just are publishing a blog post today on kind of the scientific heritage of determining that generation range. So I think we often in genealogy say like 25 years, like you mentioned. And there's good evidence for that in research, but research in general, even over a long period of our past, is actually suggesting that generation should be longer and that it's different for men and women, which probably isn't terribly surprising, right? Men have children way longer into their older years than women do. And so that's also something interesting, right, to take into account is um, even the gender of the ancestor that you're looking for and if they had multiple partners and things like that. So yeah, so we've got a couple people. I'll just share this one from, oh, I guess I need to take my other banner down, but we've got a couple people sharing in here. Like Barbara says, my mom uh, had number 13 5 months after my oldest sister had her first child, right? So exactly. So if you know this about your family, then you can really understand kind of how to use that tool a little bit more responsibly, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now compare the data in the CM Explainer tool that's at MyHeritage and is free. Anybody can access it, even if you haven't tested in MyHeritage. It's a tool you can access. And then the difference between the data and how they're working things there and the Shared Centimorgan project, which is a tool that you helped create. So maybe you could just give us a little background on why did you do this? How long ago was it? How many years has it been going on? And that kind of thing. And then kind of compare those two data sets for us.
So the Shared Centimorgan project began in 2015 because what I realized was, we had expected amounts for various relationships, right? So for a first cousin, an expected amount might be, based on perfect genetics, would be something like 750 centimorgans, something like that. And what we realized is there's natural variation. So if I did have a first cousin test and they were 30 centimorgans shared, is that unusual? If it was 1,000 centimorgans shared, is that unusual? And we didn't have any of that kind of data available. And so I thought, all right, well, why don't I just start a project where people will send me their submissions of here's the relationship, here's the amount of DNA that we share. And then I took all of that data. I have now, in the most recent version, a couple of years ago, more than 60,000 different submissions, and gathered it all together to create ranges and averages and histograms. And the difference is, however, that the Shared Centimorgan project is not for prediction. It's not a great tool for saying, here's the amount of shared DNA, here's the probability of various relationships. Instead, what it allows you to do is say, if I have shared this much DNA with a match, and I think it is a first cousin relationship, I can look and see where it falls within the known range for first cousin. And if it fits well in the range, that's a good sign. If it doesn't fall well within the range, that raises a red flag. And then I can do the same thing for a second cousin comparison. And so I recently presented about this topic, and I thought of it as sort of being almost like a Venn diagram, where we have one circle that is relationship probabilities and another circle that is the Shared Centimorgan project, which is relationship estimation or analysis. And where we want to find is the perfect overlap between the two. Take your predictions, go and do the analysis at the Shared Centimorgan project, and together, I think those make your analysis even stronger. So, and as always, if you go to thegeneticgenealogist.com, right at the top link, you can submit your own data to the Shared Centimorgan project, and it benefits all genealogists when you make those submissions. So feel free to submit.
I have never heard you explain it like that. And that was really, really helpful. So, just to recap for everybody, what he just said was like a little bit like this, little bit mind blowing, I feel like. So, what he's saying is if you already have a hypothesis or an idea of how you're related to someone, taking that genetic relationship, that shared amount of DNA into to the Shared Centimorgan project, it's like asking the project, what do you think? Could this person really be my first cousin once removed? And the project's coming back with, sure, that'll work. Or we don't love that. Could you look again, right? And
Yep.
looking again might be getting a different person to test, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
looking at your siblings' relationship with that person or whatever it might be,
Yep.
versus a tool that actually predicts relationship that's more empirical, which would be like the CM explainer at MyHeritage, where you're asking it, I have no idea who this person is at all. Can you help? Is
Yep,
that
that's correct.
awesome?
Yep,
That's
yep.
actually super interesting. I'm so glad I asked you that because now I've learned something, and that's always awesome. Okay, so speaking of your blog, as you just mentioned, there's a lot of resources, and you've been writing that blog for a very, very long time. So I was actually wondering, what's the top blog post on your blog, which I assume is actually about the Shared Centimorgan project. So if we were to ignore that one,
Mhm.
what's the other kind of top topic that people are coming and reading about on your blog?
So I guess it's kind of a tie between two. The first I would say is about 2007, 2008, early on in the blog, I wrote a blog post about XDNA inheritance.
Mm.
And I created a couple of fan charts that show, the unique inheritance pattern of the X chromosome. And it's such a smaller portion of your overall family tree that it's very convenient when you work with XDNA matches. And so it's just really those fan charts that explain here are the possible lines you could have inherited XDNA from. And I think because that was sort of a new, not so much a new concept, but I guess a new way to visualize it, a new way to think about it. A lot of people didn't realize this, and so those charts have been just ubiquitously used by genealogists, and so that's been a very popular blog post. The other is one that I wrote around the same time frame. It's about our two family trees. We have a genealogical family tree, and then we have a genetic family tree, which is our subset of genetic ancestors. Those have kind of been my two biggest blog posts over the years. And the funny thing is, they were written early in the beginning, so apparently I've never achieved that same level, but
It's all right. Keep trying.
that's
Keep
right.
trying.
That's right. Something to strive for.
All right, so let's talk about those two ideas. So when we're talking XDNA, so obviously the fan charts are really helpful, but can you tell us, like, why should someone pay attention to who they are or are not XDNA matching? How does that help them in their research?
So, for example, the power of, say, Y-DNA is that we always know where in our tree our Y-DNA came from, right? It's from our father's father's father. Same for mitochondria. We always know where in our tree is. Autosomal is harder because if I share autosomal DNA, what line could that have come from? And the answer to that is yes. And that's the problem, right? And so with XDNA, what we can say is it's not every line. It's this limited subset of lines you might share with this match. And I'll take a limited number of lines to compare with someone versus all of them any day. That's the value of XDNA, just like Y and mito. It's much more focused as far as the lines we should be examining for our shared DNA. And if you don't know what lines those are, go to the blog post and you'll find the charts.
Excellent. Okay, and then tell us, just expand just a little bit more on that idea of having a genetic family tree versus a genealogy family tree.
Sure. So if we got DNA from all of our ancestors, we would just be a DNA blob because, we have a lot of ancestors. We can't have DNA from all of our ancestors. My genome is the same exact size as my 10th great grandparents' genome. And so what that means is we can only grab snippets from certain ancestors, right? We get DNA from all of our grandparents, our great grandparents, and so on. But somewhere around maybe 5 generations or so, 5 to 7, we start to actually lose genealogical ancestors in our DNA. And so it's a random process, right? I might get DNA from this line and from that line and from this line, but it's all random. And part of genetic genealogy, in a way, is figuring out what lines we may have inherited DNA from. It's kind of hard at this point, but someday we might actually recreate our genetic family tree, just like we work on our genealogical family tree.
Right. And if we're going to do that, it means we have to get more people to test, right?
Much more.
Because
Yep.
we'll only be able to do that if we've been able to collect all that DNA out of all the living descendants of our ancestors. So that makes it even more important to reach out, test your siblings, test your cousins, so that you can capture as much of that ancestral DNA as possible. So yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to share this comment from Jay Rock. He just wants to thank Blaine for his excellent book. It was one of the first ones that I purchased back in about 2016-ish or so, and still frequently refer to it. So perhaps for those who aren't as blessed as Jay and haven't read your book, tell us a little bit about what your book is and where they can find it. And I know someone's going to ask then, are you going to be writing any more?
So, all right. So I kind of have two main books. It's the Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy. That one's available anywhere. Pretty much you can buy a book online, Amazon, places like that. That book is written to help people get started, maybe at the beginner intermediate stage, about introduction to the tools, introduction to the companies, introduction to how to utilize Y-DNA, mito, X, autosomal, all of that. The other book is called Genetic Genealogy and Practice that I wrote with the wonderful, late and great Debbie Parker Wayne. That's actually a hands-on workbook. You can find that on Amazon, various other places. And so, am I going to write book? I have ideas for books, absolutely, and I wish I could just stop time and work on it for like 6 months or a year. It would be perfect, but I'm in the process of kind of bringing those things to fruition, including hopefully version 3 of the Family Tree Guide, because the instant that book publishes, it's quickly becoming out of date. Thankfully, because the world of genetic genealogy is always developing. So, but I'm always thinking and working on stuff. So
awesome. All right. Well, that's our wish list for you, is just to keep churning out excellent content. But our question is, what's your wish list? If you could create any tool for genetic genealogists, what would it be?
It's collaboration. We are all working as islands in genetic genealogy, and it is so regrettable because we can't share our discoveries in an easy way, right? I can write up a research article, I can publish it, I can make that available, I can share it with family, but it's not universally available. It's really hard for me to make a discovery and assign a piece of DNA to my great, 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 great grandparents and find a way for you to be able to take advantage of that. We need a collaborative platform where we can assign DNA to ancestors of a universal family tree. WikiTree does this a little bit, but it needs to be easier. It needs to be more intuitive, and it just needs to be a process where we can all share our results in an easy way. And that would be the tool that I would want to create.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. Let's do it. So I heard
Right?
you talk about this past weekend at the East Coast Genetic Genealogy Conference, and I was like fired up. I love
Yep.
this idea, and I think this is, I mean, we can do this, right?
Yeah.
Neither
Yeah.
of us are programmers, but like we know people, right?
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
pool our resources and figure this out. I love your vision. I'm on board. Let's
Awesome.
do it. Okay. And another thing I heard you talk about a little bit this past weekend was AI. So, can you tell us one way that you used AI in your genealogy in the last week?
Sure. Actually, I have a Facebook group called Genealogy and Artificial Intelligence, and I actually just posted something there this morning. I woke up early and I had this idea. The newest version of ChatGPT, which is currently only the paid version, allows input of images. And so what I did is I took the family tree of 4 DNA matches in a shared match cluster. I provided those screenshots of the family trees to ChatGPT, and I said, find surnames in common between 2 or more of these trees, right? Because we do that on a daily basis. But it's not an easy process. I shouldn't have to manually comb through all of these trees to find the commonality. It should be automated for me. Sure enough, ChatGPT said, this is the surname I found in 2 or more of those trees. And it was exactly right. And so that process, it's still a little manual, because I have to take the screenshots and upload them. But imagine I could upload, say, 20 screenshots of 20 trees in a cluster, right? And then I could say, find a surname that's in 20 of these trees, or I could say that's in 10 or more of these trees, and so on. And so I think that's a really powerful application, and it's one of many, including some we haven't even thought of yet.
Awesome. That's very exciting. So if you missed it, the Facebook group, again, tell us the name so people can join.
It is Genealogy and Artificial Intelligence.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. Let me see. I've got one more question. Well, one more basic question here for you. Let's talk just a little bit about what happened last week with the 23andMe data breach. So, if you could kind of just summarize the facts that we have about this incident, and then tell us, what do you think is the impact of something like this on our industry, and maybe what, if anything, do you feel like we can do to help mitigate things like this in the future?
So the information is still a little wishy-washy. So, things could change as we learn about new developments. The investigation's ongoing, but what it looks like is some data, some, I don't want to say hackers because they weren't
Yeah.
necessarily hackers really, but individuals acquired login email addresses and found passwords that these email addresses had used at other places and accessed their 23andMe results. And then scraped some data like the shared, like the match list and so on. And presumably, it looks like they got access to potentially a list of a million or more people in these match lists, and then offered that to sale and or threatened 23andMe with release if they didn't respond accordingly. And so it looks like that information was out there. Now, interestingly, if we think about it, the problem isn't so much with 23andMe here. It's the users that recycle passwords. And password recycling is an immense threat. And as we can see here now, it's not just a threat to the recycler's account, it's a threat to everyone. It's a threat to the platform itself. It's a threat to genetic genealogy. So we have to be careful never to reuse passwords, right? I use a password keeper. So it's not like you have to remember 1,000 passwords. We have software that does that. And also consider having two-factor authorization, right? Where when you log into your account, it's annoying, right? It is. 2FA is annoying, but it keeps us all safe. And so having that extra step of security, I think, is a good thing. What's going to happen now, how this will impact the industry, I don't know, because again, this isn't necessarily the fault of 23andMe. And so I don't know what the solution would be by them, right? Do we really want them to access or to limit our access in a way that prevents us from seeing that kind of information? That's the last thing we want. And so we want to also be careful about knee-jerk reactions by the testing companies as well. So it remains to be seen what that effect is. It's concerning, particularly if, as might be happening here, there was targeted populations in the 23andMe data gathering, but it's just a terrible thing. It's too bad that we live in a world where people do this, but it's the way it is.
Yeah, I agree. All right, our final question as we're heading up with our getting our half hour in here is, I would love for you to share with everybody why this work of family history is important to you.
I started genealogy in middle school with an assignment to fill out a family tree. And I always joke when I talk about this that I have not yet completed that assignment. 30 years later, here I am still working on a middle school assignment. But working in family history has connected me with family that I never would have connected with, both living and deceased. It has connected me with people all over the world. It's connected you and I as friends. It's connected so many people with me and to each other. And so for me, it's not just figuring out that John Smith was a farmer in upstate New York and had an amazing life. That's cool stuff. But also it's about, real connections with real people all over the world that I have made. And I value all of those relationships. We may not have spoken in, 5 years, but we'll come together and find each other at a conference and it'll be like no time passed at all. And so I think it's all about just human connection for me.
I agree. I agree. That is what this is all about, isn't it? Is it's not just, and I think this goes back to your wish list, right? It's about creating an even bigger and greater connection between us, right? To allow us to share our discoveries in a way that's discoverable and that they don't get lost, and that people aren't having to redo the work you've already done just because they couldn't find what you did, right?
Yep.
And I think a collaboration like that would also show us how small the world is, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because we actually are connected on so many levels that we don't even really recognize. But if we had something to show us, I think it would be really powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to share a couple of comments here from the chat for us. This is from Joyce. Mr. Bettinger, you have mastered your fear of public speaking. You make things make sense like Diane does. It's a pleasure listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you, Joyce, for coming. You have Joe is saying thank you, cousin Blaine. So your cousin's here with us today. So that's
Awesome.
nice. So thank you again for pinch hitting for us today and being so willing to share your time and your expertise with us. You are always and will forever be my hero. So thank you,
Thank
Blaine,
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
take care, everybody. We'll see you next week on another Ask the Experts. Bye.